From London, media reports suggest that Britain's National Security Council has given the go-ahead for cooperation with China's telecom giant Huawei. If confirmed, how damaging could this be to U.S. efforts to rally Western resistance to 5G technologies produced in China? And from Shanghai, momentum builds for China's first homegrown large passenger jet. Though the C919 has yet to fly commercially, could it one day challenge the heavyweights of global aviation? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. The UK could be going its own way once again. This time it's not with Brexit, but instead concerning China, Huawei and the future of 5G. While the US and 28 European member states gathered last week in Prague to try to make a unified position on 5G-related security concerns, the UK indicated that it may break ranks with its allies. Media reports suggested that the UK's National Security Council, led by Prime Minister Theresa May, is likely to give Chinese company Huawei the green light to participate in the country's 5G rollout whenever it happens. What explains the potential for UK-China cooperation on 5G, and how significant would this UK move be as the US tries to rally opposition to Huawei and broader Chinese 5G efforts? Joining me here in the studio is Professor Cui Hongjian, Director of the European Department at the China Institute of International Studies, and from Durham, the UK, is Thom Brooks, Dean and Professor of Law and Government from Durham Law School. Welcome, gentlemen, to The Point. And let me go to Professor Brooks here. It has been widely reported in late April that Huawei gets the green light to participate in the UK's 5G rollout, but there has been no formal confirmation yet. What do we know as to the progress so far, as to exactly what happened in that behind closed door deliberation, and do we know, are we any clearer about exactly what was talked about and exactly what was agreed upon?
In normal times, I would have expected that that decision by the National Security Council to be kind of confirmed later by the government and some action taken within a couple months. Of course, we're not in normal times in the UK. The government is effectively crippled by Brexit deliberations, trying to get past a Brexit deal that has failed to get to Parliament 3 times. The Prime Minister is under increasing calls from her own party to resign from office right now and possibly trigger a leadership election and a new Prime Minister of Britain this summer. So I think the real difficulty with kind of ratifying, confirming this decision, should Britain choose to go ahead, is just all the other things that the government is having to deal with at the same time, and I would expect that would lead to some delays. Those are, that Brexit decision being, really the key one for the Prime Minister right now.
The UK's any possible decision to cooperate with Huawei seems to be walking away from the so-called Five Eye Alliance, which is led by the United States. They have been expressing very serious concerns over Huawei for the alleged backdoor that the company can install to the telecoms infrastructure that it builds in whichever country it has that project, citing that the Chinese securities law forces Chinese companies to do that when it is necessary. So, Professor Cui, from whatever we know coming out of that meeting, is the UK kind of ignoring or defying the United States as a warning or advice on this matter?
So this time I really hope that UK could do something very special, just like it did several years ago by cooperating with China in the name of Golden Era and also global comprehensive partnership with China. Because we know recently it looks like a little bit the UK has been put itself into a dilemma or difficult situation. As we know that because there is a cabinet meeting and some issues about the leakage of some discussion, everything. So we can find, firstly, so far, maybe not yet, there is a consensus among all of the members of the cabinet. And also at the same time, maybe for UK, it tried to keep a balance between, so how could they get some more cooperation with China in 5G network issue, and also get some maybe position towards the US as we know, the so-called very important allies. So I think it's important for UK to find out what's the clear, criteria to decide the 5G issue. I believe that as a country to insist a kind of opening up and marketing economy, I think it would be rational for UK to decide this issue in the logic of economy and technology, not in so-called politics and security.
Chinese ambassador to the UK, Liu Xiaoming, earlier published an article in the Sunday Telegraph saying China and the UK can build a future of win-win results by sticking to independent decision-making, among others. So, Mr. Brooks, what is your opinion on this? Do you think independent decision-making is really important for the UK at this particular moment? And how will the UK's independent decision-making be affected or not affected by its special relationship with the United States?
Well, I think that the independent decision-making was surely an attempt to reassure, to encourage the Prime Minister to proceed as the National Security Council had decided to go ahead with this deal. Britain's going to have to do something different. If we're outside the European Union on less favorable terms than at present, then Britain will need to have some new arrangement somewhere else, whether it be a better arrangement with existing partners or creating some new deals. The opportunity to work more closely with its good friend China is a remarkable opportunity. I agree with the comments of your other commentator, and I think something that the Prime Minister is right to certainly consider very seriously. I do think politics is a big problem here with the Prime Minister's position, and quite frankly, I'm far the security concerns really should be around the leaking of debates, discussions in Britain's National Security Council, not by any allegations about other companies. Why a defense now sacked Defense Secretary who the Prime Minister has said was the source of the leak. Coming out with stuff like this is really very concerning, and something that the Prime Minister will want to draw a line under. But independent decision-making will be that, and I think to some degree the British government, if it's going to have Brexit at all, is going to have to think very carefully about how it will do independent thinking, independent strategy, and working with China and finding new sources to work together is a potentially very fruitful path forward for both countries.
Last week in Prague, as I mentioned, representatives from some 30 EU countries and NATO agreed on some 5G security guidelines, warning governments against relying on suppliers susceptible to state influence. And it said it is speculated that specific measures are to be hashed out after rounds of assessment by October this year. So, Professor Cui, given the different attitudes towards Huawei among EU countries, and given that no binding outcome document came out of this meeting, although this is only the first such meeting, how worried should Huawei be?
Recently, as we know, the United States imposed a lot of the pressure upon its European allies, and also some European countries. They try to keep a balance that they should give some response to requirement from Washington, but at the same time, they also take the value of the cooperation with China. So some European countries or some NATO members, they do have this requirement to have maybe find out a so-called common stand on this issue related to the Huawei and the 5G network. But so far, I think that we can find out, even for this meeting in Prague, we can even find out so far still there are not of the diversity among all of the member states of the European Union and even for NATO. I think that now the very big issue is all of the European countries, they need to decide their own interests. They need to decide their own position to get cooperation with Huawei or not, just by its own national interests. So I think now it's a very, very important time for this country to make clear what's their own interests and what's the interest just for Washington, but in the name of common interests.
Let's go back to the issue of Brexit a little bit, as our guest in the UK talked about. At this moment, the future, the prospect is still not very clear, and the political future of Ms. May is also very much in uncertain territory. And yet, she seems to be at least trying to think independently in terms of UK's future relationship with China. So, Professor Brooks, how do you look at the immediate prospects for China-UK relations as Ms. May's political future is still kind of hanging in the balance?
Well, I think looking forward, I mean, there ought to be a very close working relationship between both countries. There's a lot of common interests, a lot of things that are in the interest of both countries to build on. If Britain were to leave the European Union, or I dare say it, if Brexit doesn't happen, Britain even then would be a very strong call to at least have developed some type of independence or some new realignment, however it can. I think there's a fruitful future there. The big problem at the moment is really on the UK side, and that is the political instability we have in Westminster. The Prime Minister at the moment has not been shown to be able to command a majority in Parliament. She's not been able to get her deal passed. She's not been able to get other measures passed. Today we have another backbencher Tory saying that he is effectively resigning the whip and will not be supporting our government. Another Tory member of Parliament yesterday at Prime Minister's questions called on the Prime Minister to step down. I mean, unprecedented territory. So her future is really being called into question, not just by the usual suspects in the opposition who you'd expect would want to replace the Prime Minister, but increasingly vociferous calls on her own side. And I think that's really the big problem. A paralyzed government, not able to get its measures through, refusing to bow to calling a general election that might clear the decks and restart things. And that is going to be the biggest single hindrance, the biggest obstacle to the UK, not just achieving something on Brexit, but doing about anything else, whether it be about working on infrastructure. There's been for many years a project to develop a high-speed rail line that has not been going very far, very quickly, or in doing foreign policy work such as building close relations with China. Okay, a country that's kind of hijacked by a very big political crisis. Well, many thanks to my two guests, Thom Brooks, Dean and Professor of Law and Government from Durham Law School, and Professor Cui Hongjian, Director of the European Department at the China Institute of International Studies.